Welcome back to another Sunken City card review. We've got some pretty exciting ones this time around, kicking it off with a new Mage legendary Commander Sivara. This is a new Naga for Mage. She's a 4-mana 3/5. Battle Cry, if you've cast 3 spells while holding this, add those spells back to your hand. So some real crazy card generation and value generation potential here. Getting 3 spells that are very often going to be ones from your deck. And of course, pretty synergistic and powerful if you're building your deck with all of these pieces together. Now, think about examples like 2 wildfires getting played along with, I don't know, an ignite. And then you play Sivara, you get 2 more wildfires, pumping your hero power like crazy. And you can start to see the potential of this. Or maybe it's just like 3 ignites. It's possible, right? And you just shuffle a billion ignites into your deck. There are some real sky is the limit potential when it comes to, I think, setting up like synergistic stuff like wildfires, getting extra copies of things that you might want extra copies of in your deck, or just crazy burst damage potential, shipping a lot of stuff face and using this as a way to get a bunch more burst damage back in hand. So those potentials do exist. Now, I do think Sivara has some challenges to overcome. Essentially, there's going to be some awkwardness about the spells that are actually being remembered for Sivara. She's going to remember the first 3 spells that you play. So if you have her, say, in your opening hand early in a game, and you don't have like the wildfires that you were really hoping to utilize, then you might have to use like card draw or something, or some bad removal piece early in a game, and she's just remembering that bad removal piece in card draw, which perhaps isn't all that exciting, and she becomes more about just a generic value generator as opposed to enabling some cool specific win condition or game plan. I think she's less exciting in those worlds. I mean, it's still 3 cards for 4 mana. That's not ever probably a terrible result, but you know, it limits her utility as a win condition or like super specific use case. There is also that top deck downside for this where it takes a little while to fuel her up potentially. I do think that's actually less of a risk for Mage in the way Mage plays. They often have stuff kind of moving into hand and cycling into hand and don't lack for choice. So you could probably chill on her for a turn or 2. It's not going to be that big of a deal while you're moving other spells into Sivara's memory. So all in all, I mean, there's some like crazy potential here. I don't think it's going to work in a lot of decks though. I think it's going to need to have some pretty specific build cases and some high payoff results. Theoretically could toss her into a lot of different decks as just a value generator, but most of the time Mage is looking to spend their mana in very directed ways, and sometimes this won't feel directed. It'll feel a little too awkward. So solid option, but not an everyday card, I don't think. And the next up here is Krakatoa, the rogue colossal minion. This is a 6-mana 6/5 beast because he's a giant crab. Colossal +2, and he reads your Krakatoa claws have +2 attack. And the Krakatoa claws, as you can see, are 2/1s with rush, and Death Rattle equip a 2/1 claw. But they're not really 2/1s as long as Krakatoa is alive. They're really 4/1s because he's giving them +2 attack. So basically this gives you 8 damage of rush minions on board. So you can use that to take a nice little swing on board. And then when you trade them in, basically you're getting a claw. And I'm reading on Twitter that the claw you get off the Death Rattle is also affected by Krakatoa. So it's going to be a 4/1 weapon. They said Krakatoa's claws do not cease to be Krakatoa's claws even when detached from Krakatoa. So the idea here is you summon Krakatoa, you trade in one of the claws, deal 4 damage to something, you get the weapon, you attack something for 4, maybe face. Then, since that durability's gone, it was just a 2/1, you trade in the other claw and you get another weapon for next turn that might be a 4/1 if Krakatoa lives, probably just a 2/1 weapon, but it's at least a little bit of upside. And then if you do anything to resummon claws or Krakatoa, of course, they all kind of exist independently, so still fine to get maybe a claw off of a resummoned Krakatoa's claw sometime in the future. So all in all here, a card that allows a lot of reactivity on board, I think, for 6 mana, and a little bit of face damage and like future upside as well with the leftover claw, although I will admit it is rather minimal. But this is just a nice board builder. Deposit some damage and threats on board. It's a little expensive for Rogue. We tend to find bigger cards like this are clunky for Rogue unless they're just straight up ending the game or going face like Mr. Smite. So I know a lot of decks for Rogue will cut this or just won't make room for it because it's too expensive. but there might be a faster deck that uses this as its like top end of the curve. It's got a little bit more tempo and mid-game aspects. This kind of reminds me of Jandis in a weird way. It's clearly very distinct, but it's still 3 bodies on board and a lot for some opponents to deal with potentially, and kind of a removal tool as well. So all in all, Krakatoa looks like a pretty solid card, but you know, just not something that's going to fit perfectly in Rogue all the time. All right, next up here we have Bioluminescence, a beautiful new card for Shaman. It's a 3-mana nature spell, and it reads, give your minions spell damage +1. And cards like this scare me. I feel like there's a lot of potential here for some big damage potential, some OTK potential. Basically, as soon as any card comes along that allows you to get a fairly wide board, a card like this ups the damage of all of the crazy 1-mana Shaman damage spells and 2-mana Shaman damage spells and so on by, you know, 3, 4, 5, up to 7 damage per spell. And, you know, there aren't necessarily always going to be great options for that, but anything that even gets close. And then there's like maybe dormant stuff. You play some dormant stuff and then it pops up all at once so that you can bioluminescence it. There's all kinds of ways to set up absurdly strong combos off of a card like bioluminescence. There's also ways to like duplicate this in Quest Shaman, for instance, so that they each get 2 spell damage, and then all your spells are duplicated for 87 billion damage, and suddenly you start to look like, oh my god, this card is going to be able to end so many freaking games. Now, you know, that may not ever coalesce into a good deck. That may not be possible. There may not be good enough ways to get those reliably wide boards, but that potential and that threat seemingly always exists when a card like this exists. So I think this has a high potential to be good and occasionally very, very frustrating. And for Shaman, look at this. It's Schooling, a 1-mana spell. It adds 3 1/1 Piranha Swarmers to your hand. We've also got the other Piranha Swarmer card we saw previously, and the Piranha Swarmers themselves. If you'll remember, they have rush and kind of buff each other. And I'm still not super excited for this as a Piranha Swarmer card, because it's like, 1 mana for a bunch of these, it's just not going to go far enough, I'm afraid. Like, this is a 4 mana total card to summon 3 dudes. That's not that exciting. But in combination with our spell damage buff, with bioluminescence, could this be the way to get that set up? I still think that's a little bit too expensive, making you spend 1 on everything and 3 on the spell. You're not going to have any mana left for the actual damage spells themselves. So I don't know if this card in particular is the tool, but if you had any kind of wide hand discount that could push all these to 0, boy, look out. That is a recipe that is awfully scary. So I don't think this card is going to be good on average. I don't really see this Piranha Swarmer thing coming together. They just don't seem to do enough individually, and this is just a lot of mana to commit to them. So this card has that only fringe potential, I think, to set up some kind of combo or have some huge upside, but I think that's going to be hard to realize, and there's probably going to be a different way to utilize bioluminescence to success. And the next up for Shaman here, we have the Coral Keeper, a new 5-mana 3/4 Naga. Battlecry, summon a 3/3 elemental for each spell school you've cast this game. And this is a pretty nutty threat on board. This feels like a big bomb potentially for only 5 mana. I think, you know, you're going to be happiest when you get 3 elementals out of this, which we've seen with multicaster and Shaman is a pretty reliable thing to do. Might not be quite as easy by turn 5 when this is going to be most impactful, but I think just tossing this into a deck as a mid to late game, just board reload, maybe you get some spell damage, although that seems a little expensive. It might be enough. Like, some decks just need those mid game threats to keep the pressure moving and keep it up. And I think 2/3/3 elementals is okay for this. It's not something that's exciting, but as soon as you get beyond 2, this starts to become a really nice wide board builder that could cause some decks problems if you just keep building these kinds of boards and threats out over time. So slotting this in as a threat next to a multicaster deck that's already doing a lot of that stuff well does make sense to me. That said, multicaster, the way it's utilized right now, just draws you tons of burst damage, which ends games, and ending games can often be better and more threatening than just developing stuff. So a lot of other decks may not really need a card like this. They could push it to the side pretty quickly in favor of more decisive game plans. Up here is the Fires of Zin Ashari, and I freaking love this card so much. It's a 2-mana warrior spell. It replaces your deck with minions that cost 5 or more, and they cost 5. So basically put a bunch of big stuff in your deck, and then a good portion of it is going to be discounted. So you can get 10 drops that only cost 5 mana, a bunch of colossal minions that only cost 5 mana. So toss 2 of these in. It doesn't really matter what else you have. Who cares? Maybe some survivability early, and then just try to win on the back of gigantic minions. Will this ever be good? I really doubt it. We've seen time and time again that these randomly generated minion things are more meme than they are good. I think that will remain true for Fires of Zin Ashari, but I don't care. I'm going to play the crap out of this card, even though I do not think it will be very strong at all. All right, next up we have a Druid card, Shaman Gardens, a 1-mana spell. It gives all minions in your hand +1/+1 and puts a Sunken Gardens on the bottom of your deck. That Sunken Gardens gives +1/+1 to all minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield. So man, if you dredge that up, that is a monster buff across the board. And of course, Druid loves wide board buffs, and at 1 mana getting stuff on board buffed and in deck is pretty darn cool. Now, I will say, you know, historically, Druid has relied more on spells to summon their wide boards, and they wouldn't really do a lot from hand buffs because most of their cards are actually spells, not minions. That said, of course, kind of taunt beast versions of Druid lately have relied a little bit more on minions, and a card like this might be the way to get some big wide buffs on those, both in deck and on board occasionally with Sunken Gardens. But as is always the case with these Sunken cards, it's a lot of work, I think, sometimes to dig up the second half of this, the Sunken Gardens part, that I think is really the more powerful part. And of course, you don't want to draw that last in the game, because by then the game is already over, number one, or you don't have anything left in deck to actually buff. So you are going to have to dredge that up or shuffle your deck in some way to get the Sunken Gardens in time, which I think puts this kind of overhead or tax on it, or you're going to probably be playing a dredge card you're not excited to play. Now, we're going to look at a dredge card that is very, very efficient here in a second. So that might be the answer to a card like this problem. But ultimately, this just puts out a lot of power. It does so much for only 1 mana. Cards like that, I always like to keep an eye on. They seem to have potential. So the front half of this is also totally fine sometimes, just getting a nice hand buff. So all in all, awkward in some cases. It's going to be tough to use, but because the power output is so high, I still think some deck will figure out a way to make this work. So here is that Dredge card. It's aquatic form, a 0-mana spell for Druid. Dredge, and if you have the mana to play the card this turn, draw it. And obviously for our previous card at 1 mana, it's not hard to have the mana to get that. So you could get a pretty cool big deck buff between aquatic form and our previous card as well as Shaman Gardens. And that seems like the recipe for a crazy deck. It kind of reminds me of like Embiggen of old almost, where you can just buff your whole deck, but in this case, no additional cost. So you're really going to be able to pump out some crazy stats between these two cards. On top of that, I think aquatic form outside of even that world is just a really cool tracking style effect, where as long as you're not grabbing something super expensive early in the game, you're often just going to be able to grab the card you want for 0 mana, basically, which tracking has been a fantastic card in Hunter. This is going to be a tracking sort of thing, but even cheaper, and it's a 0-mana spell, which can also have some cool synergies and upsides as well, proccing all kinds of different stuff. So aquatic form across the board seems like a very powerful tool, both with the cards we've seen right now, but also just in general. I think this is a nutty card. And then next up here is our Priest card, Handmaiden. This is a 3-mana 3/2 Naga with Battlecry. If you've cast 3 spells while holding this, draw 3 cards. And of course, that's a lot of card draw for 3 mana, especially on a stick like this with a body. And that's nuts. And Priest likes card draw too. Often they've lacked in card draw. So this could be a major gap filler for the class that's desperate for card draw, and one that often plays a lot of spells as well. We've had this like Spell Priest, Miracle Priest thing going on with Nazmani and Sethic Veilweaver. That's going to be going away. A card like this would have been kind of nuts for that deck, minus the kind of tutoring problems where they're always trying to find the specific minions. But just as a reload option, this could have been great. They used like Malagos in the past for that. Now, without those cards being there, I don't know that that Spell Priest, Miracle Priest thing is going to exist. So Handmaiden might have lost a home, but I could easily see another spell, buff, cycle kind of priest come along with a bunch of Naga synergies, and this being the reload or refuel for that deck. And such a powerful reload tool at that. So Handmaiden isn't going to have an obvious home right away as far as meta decks in standard format right now. But again, the power level on this card just seems so high that there's always potential for it to succeed. Still has that top deck problem we always talk about, but again, Priest as a class can keep a lot of cards in hand and maybe just use this on the future turn. They have survivability, game length in their favor to keep a card like this in hand to make sure that it's not just totally dead, whereas a more aggro or face-focused class might have a harder problem navigating these top deck issues for Naga cards like this one. Moving on here to the Shaman Defector, a new Demon Hunter minion. He's a 4-mana 5/3 with Rush, and Death Rattle put a Sunken Defector on the bottom of your deck. The Sunken Defector is pretty nuts, 4-mana 5/3 Naga with Charge, and after this attacks, deal 5 damage to a random enemy minion. So that basically allows you to go face and still react to your opponent's board, which could obviously be pretty powerful. Now, the downside, of course, here is that the front half of this card, the Shaman Defector, it's okay. A 5-mana or 4-mana 5/3 with Rush is okay. It's actually worse than a card like Flanking Strike for Demon Hunter, I would argue, but it's not like a dead turn by any means. It allows you to clear something while setting this up, but then you gotta dredge out your Sunken Defector, which means you're either gonna need to run some dredge cards specifically for this or just a bunch of card draw. Demon Hunter's good at that with things like Quest Demon Hunter. This could be a card you just put in the deck and hope to get there eventually to find some damage. Now, Quest Demon Hunter is currently running the Fell package with Jace and the Kurtrus Hero card for their burst damage finishers. I don't know that they would necessarily need a Sunken Defector, but it might not hurt to have some extra reach potential in there with these very efficient charge minions. We've also got Death Rattle synergies here, so we could see this in something like a Death Rattle Demon Hunter deck that's been a kind of under the radar good deck for a really long time now. I would argue a Shaman Defector is a little less compelling there. I think the sticky minions for Death Rattle Demon Hunter are where it succeeds the most, and this has a very delayed payoff in that deck. You might have to add too much dredge or too much additional synergy to really pull all this together. So in other words, like, you're kind of taking a downturn on 4 a little bit with the Shaman Defector because there are better 4-mana plays. And then if you're playing dredge stuff as well, that's probably also going to be a little bit of a sacrifice. Is the Sunken Defector good enough to make up for multiple sacrifices in a row? You might just fall a little bit too far behind and find that the Defector is not quite a strong enough payoff. That said, it's still a really good card, and Demon Hunter is very good at drawing stuff and manipulating their deck. So I'm going to give this card a real chance despite some of those downsides. Commander Sivara is a 3-star card. Bioluminescence is a 4-star card. Coral Keeper is a 3-star card. The Fires of Zin Ashari is a 2-star card. Krakatoa is a 3-star card. Asharan Gardens is a 4-star card. Aquatic Form is a 5-star card. Schooling is a 2-star card. Handmaiden is a 4-star card. Shaman Defector is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for review number 6. Man, we're moving right along, but still quite a few cards left, including some reveals of my own. So thanks so much as always for watching. I look forward to seeing your thoughts on these cards down in the comments below. And until next time, game on.